You're not supposed to be here. Those 6 words sliced through the silence like a blade sharp, cold, and meant to wound. No one looked at the boy when they said it. No one even called him by name. 13-year-old Jaden Carter stood by the polished oak doors of the executive boardroom on the 58th floor of the Carter Tech Tower, gripping the envelope his late grandfather had told him to bring. The boy's brown skin, worn sneakers, and second-hand hoodie stood in stark contrast to the tailored suits and glass walls of power that surrounded him. He had arrived on time, just like he was told. The invitation was in writing. But none of that seemed to matter to the men and women now staring at him like he'd wandered in from the street. One man, a senior VP named Richard Langston, stood and gestured toward the exit without even glancing at Jaden. "This is a private meeting," Langston said curtly. "You need to wait outside." Jaden opened his mouth to explain, but the words caught in his throat. Not because he didn't know what to say, but because every pair of eyes around that table held the same thing: dismissal. "Security will show you out," a woman added, tapping her tablet. The boy didn't move. He simply stared at the long glass wall that overlooked the city. For a moment, he remembered the way his grandfather used to point to these buildings and say, "One day, you'll see them from above, not below." But not today, apparently. Today, he was just another kid who didn't look like he belonged. He turned slowly, clutching the envelope tighter, and walked out without a word. What no one in that room knew, what not even the CEO himself had been told, was that Jaden wasn't just a kid. He was Charles Carter's grandson. And with Charles Carter's recent death, he was also the primary heir to 58% of Carter Tech's shares. He had come to observe, to learn, to honor his grandfather's final wish. But what he got instead was a lesson in prejudice. 3 weeks earlier, Jaden had been sitting on a park bench, watching squirrels chase each other through piles of autumn leaves, when his grandfather handed him the sealed envelope. "This is for the board," Charles Carter had said. His breath was labored, his skin pale beneath the fedora he always wore. "You don't have to say anything. Just walk in and hand this to the chairperson." Jaden frowned. "Why me?" Charles smiled soft, sad. "Because I trust you, and because they don't know you yet." He hadn't understood it then. Not fully. But now, standing outside the boardroom with flushed cheeks and watery eyes, Jaden understood everything. It wasn't about the envelope. It was about being seen. Inside the boardroom, the discussion resumed without pause. "The quarterly numbers are underwhelming," Langston was saying, flicking to a new slide. "We'll need to lay off another 15% if we're going to keep the investors happy." No one mentioned the boy. No one questioned the decision to eject him. That was how things worked here. Fast, clean, emotionless, until the glass door opened again. This time, it wasn't Jaden who entered, but Marcia Carter, Charles's daughter and Jaden's estranged aunt. Her heels clicked like gunshots against the floor as she strode in, face unreadable, eyes narrowed. "Where is he?" she demanded. The room froze. Langston cleared his throat. "If you're referring to the young visitor, was told to wait outside. He didn't identify himself, and—" "He didn't need to," Marcia snapped. "He was invited." She walked to the head of the table and dropped a thick legal folder with a thud. "Charles's final directives. Notarized." This she opened to the first page and pointed to his signature. Names Jaden Carter as the sole inheritor of voting shares. Effective immediately. Silence. No one moved. Then someone finally asked, "That boy?" "Booth's just his grandson," Marcia said coldly, "and your new majority stakeholder." The power in the room shifted like a tectonic plate cracking beneath them. Outside, Jaden sat by the elevator, watching numbers blink on the panel. When the doors opened, it was his aunt who stepped out. She smiled, not the cold business smile she wore with colleagues, but something softer. "You ready to go back in?" Jaden looked up at her, unsure. "Do I have to talk?" She shook her head. Just sit. That'll be enough." They walked in together. This time, no one told them to leave. The atmosphere was different now. Executives sat stiffly in their chairs, lips pressed into tight lines, eyes glued to the boy who had re-entered their world without a sound. Marcia sat beside him. Langston attempted to regain control. "We weren't aware the heir was a child, a person of color." Marcia raised an eyebrow. "Or someone who doesn't wear Brooks Brothers?" Langston flushed. Jaden said nothing. He looked down at the tablet, the glass reflection of himself, dark and small in a room built for white giants. But he wasn't leaving this time. He unfolded the letter. His grandfather's handwriting was neat, deliberate. "Jaden, they will judge you before you speak, before they know. But remember, the world only belongs to those who refuse to let others define them. This company is yours now. Let it with heart, not fear." "Grandpa." Jaden folded the letter again and slid it back into the envelope. Then he looked up, locking eyes with Langston. "I want to see the reports," he said quietly. "All of them." No one said a word. But in that moment, the silence was no longer rejection, it was respect. Later that day, in an elevator descending through glass and steel, Marcia looked at her nephew. "You know they're going to test you," she said. "Every day." Jaden nodded. "I know. And you're not afraid?" He looked out the glass wall, down at the streets below. "Not anymore." The days that followed were anything but quiet. Jaden became the most talked about name in Carter Tech overnight. Not in Publicia, but inside, the towering building of steel and secrets. Whispers trailed behind him like shadows. Some saw him as a symbol of Charles Carter's eccentricity, others as a threat to the clean-cut corporate machine they had spent decades building. But no one, not a single person, saw him for what he truly was. A boy who didn't ask for power, only purpose. His aunt, Marcia, took temporary reins as advisor, but made it clear from day one that Jaden's voice wasn't to be ignored. "He may not look like your average CEO," she told the executive team, "but neither did Steve Jobs in '77, and y'all worship that man like he's a prophet." A few nervous chuckles scattered through the room. No one argued. Not yet. But beneath the surface, resistance brewed. Jaden spent his first full week walking the halls of the building not with a security detail or an entourage, but alone, with a worn-out notebook and a single question he asked everyone he met. "What would you change if you could?" He asked the front desk receptionist, the janitor cleaning the elevators, the intern scrambling between meetings, and even the cafeteria cashier who gave him an extra cookie once she found out who he was. They told him stories, not numbers, not graphs, but stories about pay gaps, glass ceilings, ignored voices, and forgotten names. Stories about meetings where ideas were stolen and credit reassigned. Stories about diversity initiatives that began with great promise but died in silence. Jaden didn't say much in return. He wrote. Every night, he returned to the penthouse his grandfather had left him and reread his notes. And every night, one sentence echoed louder in his mind. Lead with heart, not fear. It was a Friday when the storm finally hit. Langston, along with 4 other senior board members, held a closed-door strategy session without Marcia or Jaden. It was supposed to be discreet, but corporate secrets travel fast in a building full of people tired of being overlooked. When Marcia stormed into the conference room 2 hours later, she found Langston already presenting a PowerPoint entitled, Interim Leadership Proposal Transitioning Back to Stability. "You've got to be kidding me," she said, arms crossed. Langston didn't flinch. "Marcia, we're trying to protect this company. A child cannot lead a multinational tech empire." Charles wasn't thinking clearly when he, "Watch your mouth." But he didn't stop. "I'm filing a motion with the board to override the succession clause. It's well within the bylaws if we can prove a breach of fiduciary responsibility. We're protecting shareholders here. Is that what you think this is about? Marcia asked, voice low and sharp. Money. Langston smiled politely. It's always about money. Marcia glanced down at the printed proposal in front of her. Then she slowly, deliberately ripped it in half. Bring it to a vote, she said. Let's see how far you get when the real owner walks into the room. And just like that, the war was official. Jaden learned about the attempted coup from Angela, a sharp-witted HR executive who had grown tired of old white men in ties pretending to be visionaries. She met him in the cafeteria, where he was halfway through a grilled cheese sandwich. They're going after you, she said, sliding into the seat across from him. Langston's rallying the board to boot you. They think they've got the votes. Jaden blinked. But I thought I'm the majority. You are, on paper. But if they can prove you're unfit, the board can vote to suspend your authority. Temporary, of course. Just long enough for them to get everything your grandfather stood for. Jaden looked down at his sandwich, appetite gone. What do I do? Angela leaned in. You fight like hell. The emergency board meeting was called for the following Monday. Jaden didn't wear a suit. He showed up in the same gray hoodie he wore the day they kicked him out. Not to be defiant, but to be honest. He didn't want to be someone else just to earn the right to exist. The boardroom was packed. Executives lined the table. Legal teams huddled near the back wall, and a dozen staffers hovered outside, pretending not to eavesdrop. Langston stood at the head of the room, ready. I move that the board formally suspend Jaden Carter's voting privileges until a competency review can be conducted by an independent firm. Whispers followed. Several heads nodded. A few glanced at Jaden with awkward sympathy. Marcia was already on her feet. You don't get to silence him just because he makes you uncomfortable. Langston ignored her. This is not personal. It's procedural. Jaden slowly stood. Every eye turned to him. I have something to say, he said quietly, before you vote. Langston rolled his eyes. This isn't a TED Talk, kid. But Jaden didn't flinch. He walked to the center of the room, notebook in hand. I've spent the past week talking to people in this building, he began. Not the ones in corner offices, but the ones who keep the lights on literally. The ones who clean up after your meetings, who make sure your Zoom calls don't crash, who train new hires and get zero credit. He flipped open his notebook. I asked them what they would change, and you know what almost every one of them said? He paused. They want to feel seen. That's it. Not more money. Not more perks. Just respect. Some executives shifted in their seats. Jaden looked straight at Langston. You talk about protecting this company, but a company isn't a stock price. It's people, and I've seen more heart and brilliance in this building's basement than I've seen in this room today. Langston scoffed. You think speeches win board votes? Jaden walked back to his seat. No, he said, but maybe truth does. There was silence. Then Marcia stood. I second the motion to let Jaden continue his leadership. As the legal heir and majority shareholder, his authority is valid unless overruled by a 2/3 vote. Let's see who here wants to be on record voting to silence a grieving grandson who's done nothing but honor his legacy. Hands began to lower. Langston's jaw clenched. One by one, board members declined to support his motion. He lost. Jaden didn't smile. Even as the meeting adjourned and executives returned to their emails and spreadsheets, he didn't celebrate. Because this wasn't over. That afternoon, he asked Angela to help him put together a task for, say, a small group of overlooked employees from every department, charged with a single goal: rebuild the culture from the ground up. We'll call it the Echo Initiative, he said. Echo? She asked, curious. Jaden nodded. Because it's time the voices at the bottom stop fading into silence. That night, as he walked home through the city streets, Jaden paused outside a bus stop where a giant billboard displayed a Carter Tech ad. Inventing tomorrow, together. He stared at it for a long moment. Tomorrow didn't invent itself. It had to be fought for. And for the first time in his life, Jaden knew exactly who he was. Not just a kid, not just an heir. He was the echo of a promise. And he was done being quiet. The next few weeks reshaped everything. Carter Tech, once a company known for its sterile professionalism and tight-lipped operations, began to hum with something different. Uncomfortable conversations, bold proposals, whispers turning into voices. Jaden wasn't the reason for all of it, but he was the match that lit the fuse. He spent his mornings with the Echo Initiative, the team of frontline employees now meeting twice a week in what used to be a storage closet on the 12th floor. Jaden didn't lead the meetings. He listened. He took notes. He asked questions that made people blink twice before answering, not because they were complicated, but because they were real. What makes you feel invisible here? What do we pretend to care about, but actually ignore? What would make you proud to work here, not just paid? And when the sessions ended, he didn't go back to the penthouse. He stayed in the building, rode the elevators, ate lunch in the cafeteria, sat beside people who didn't know whether to say sir or kid. Slowly, the questions made their way upstairs. Langston wasn't gone, but he was quieter. He returned to his office with clipped professionalism, watching from the glass walls as his influence waned. He met with other executives in hushed tones, trying to regain momentum. The kid's being coddled, he argued. This isn't a nonprofit, it's a business. But the tide was shifting, not because of Jaden's name, because of his presence. He shows up, Angela said, everywhere. He listens. That alone puts him ahead of half the leadership here. Still, not everyone was swayed. There's no way he can hold this together, scoffed Bernard Cho, a finance executive. He's 13. He doesn't even understand taxes. Neither do most billionaires, Angela shot back. But jokes couldn't mask the growing tension. Jaden's every move was being monitored now not by security, but by people waiting for him to fail. He knew it too. Late one night, Jaden sat alone in Charles Carter's old office, the city glowing like embers beneath the windows. He held a framed photo of his grandfather, taken just months before his death. They were sitting side by side at the park. Jaden was reading aloud. Charles had his hand resting on Jaden's shoulder. It was the only photo Jaden had of the two of them together. The knock on the door was soft. Marcia entered without waiting. "Shouldn't you be asleep?" she asked, sitting across from him. Jaden shrugged. "Could say the same for you." She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "I heard about the last meeting. You shut them down pretty hard." "I didn't mean to." "I know." She paused. "That's why it worked." Jaden looked down. "They still don't want me here." "No, but they're starting to respect you." "I don't want respect because of Grandpa's name." "You're not getting it for that anymore." She leaned forward. "You're getting it because you're not playing their game. And that scares the hell out of them." Jaden thought about that. He didn't want to scare people. He wanted to change something. But maybe the two things weren't so different. The next major crack came from an unlikely place, the legal department. One of the junior counsels, a Latina woman named Rosa Alvarez, requested a private meeting with Jaden. She was nervous, even fidgeting as she sat across from him in a tiny side room on the 16th floor. "I wasn't sure I should even say this," she began, "but there are contracts. Deals your grandfather signed. Not illegal, but ethically shaky." Jaden listened as Rosa laid out the truth. Carter Tech had, for over a decade, been quietly partnering with third-party firms that used exploitative labor overseas. No official connection, no direct liability, but the profits spoke for themselves. Jaden's stomach turned. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked. Rosa's eyes welled slightly. "Because I started here thinking this place could change the world, and I don't want to be part of something that lies to the world instead." That night, Jaden read through every document she gave him his young hands, tracing the outlines of cold capitalism, masked with clean logos and empty promises. By dawn, he had made his decision. He called an emergency press conference. Marcia tried to stop him. "You're walking into a firestorm," she warned. "Then I'll walk carefully," he replied. The Carter Tech lobby transformed into a stage that morning. Cameras lined up. Reporters filled the front rows. Even employees took the day off just to watch. When Jaden stepped up to the mic, he looked smaller than ever. No podium, no notes, just him, a boy in a gray hoodie. And truth. "My name is Jaden Carter," he began. "I'm 13 years old. I didn't choose to inherit Carter Tech, but I have. And I've learned some things I wish I hadn't." He paused. "Our company has profited from silence, from ignorance, from pretending not to know where our parts come from or who suffers so we can move faster." A stir went through the crowd. "I'm not here to protect legacies. I'm here to rebuild one. Today, I'm terminating all third-party contracts that rely on exploitative labor. Effective immediately." A gasp. "This will hurt our bottom line." "I know that. But if your ethics are only as strong as your profits, you don't have ethics. You have marketing." He stepped back from the mic, chest rising. Then he walked off stage. No handshakes, no applause, just truth left hanging in the air like smoke after a fire. The fallout was immediate. Stocks dropped 11% in 2 days. News outlets ran every headline possible, from boy CEO risks empire over conscience to woke kid tanking billion-dollar company. Langston was livid. He stormed into Marcia's office, red-faced. "He's destroying what we built." "No," Marcia said calmly. "He's building what you were too afraid to." Langston pointed a finger. "You knew he'd pull this. I hope. Investors are panicking. Let them." He turned to leave, then stopped at the door. "He'll be gone by the end of the quarter. You'll see." Marcia didn't respond, because deep down, she wasn't sure if he was wrong. Meanwhile, inside Carter Tech, something extraordinary was happening. Employees began forming their own subcommittees, inspired by the Echo Initiative. One group worked on sustainability reforms. Another rewrote old hiring practices to eliminate biased filters. A third launched a mentorship program for interns of color. It wasn't perfect. There were stumbles, missteps, arguments, but it was alive. And for the first time in years, people believed they mattered. Jaden continued to walk the halls, listening. He didn't try to be everywhere. He didn't try to fix everything. He just kept showing up. And in doing so, he changed more than any memo ever could. One afternoon, Rosa approached him in the cafeteria again. This time, she had a small envelope. Inside was a handwritten letter, not from her but from his grandfather. "I found this in the legal archives," she said softly, "dated just 2 days before he died. Jay, if you're reading this, it means they didn't scare you off. I hope you've already pissed someone off. If not, you're not doing it right yet. Here's the truth. I didn't build Carter Tech alone. I built it on the backs of people who never sat at the table. And I've spent the last years trying to make that right. But time ran out. So now it's your table. Flip it if you have to. I'm proud of you already. Grandpa." Jaden folded the letter and put it in his pocket. Then he looked around the cafeteria at the engineers and custodians and accountants eating lunch side by side. Maybe it wasn't about flipping tables. Maybe it was about making longer ones. Jaden Carter sat by the window in his grandfather's office, now watching the sunlight stretch across the skyline like fingers brushing over glass and concrete. The room was quiet, but alive with echoes. A warmth filled the space that hadn't existed before. It wasn't the furniture or the view. It was the sense that something real was happening inside these walls. He could feel the shift, not just in the air, but in the people, in the way they spoke, in the way they looked at one another. and in the way they looked at him. Not as a boy who didn't belong, but as a leader who had shown them how to belong to something more. Still, the battle wasn't over, and it never would be, not in a world that resisted change with every polished smile and carefully worded email. Langston was quiet now, but he wasn't gone. He had retreated, regrouped, and redirected his efforts. Jaden had seen the new strategy taking shape in board meetings: polite obstruction, hollow agreement, delays disguised as due diligence. It was death by 1,000 cuts. And Jaden knew if he didn't act soon, Carter Tech's heartbeat would slow again, fall back into rhythm with the cold, calculated tempo of the old guard. He stood and walked to the framed photograph, still sitting near the edge of the bookshelf. His grandfather, younger, confident, alone. Jaden stared at it for a long moment. Then he turned away and made a call. "Angela," he said, "I'm going to need every department head in the auditorium by 10 a.m. today. No excuses, no proxies." "What's happening?" she asked. "I'm changing the structure of this company." A pause. "Then, I'll book the room." By mid-morning, the Carter Tech auditorium buzzed with confusion. Employees filled the seats. Department heads flanked the aisles. Executives stood along the back walls, arms crossed, murmuring. Langston was there, too, silent, watching. Jaden stepped up to the center of the stage with no slides, no teleprompter, just a mic and a mind that had aged more in 3 months than most people did in a decade. "I want to start with a question," he said, scanning the crowd. "What do you think a company is?" Some exchanged puzzled glances. No one answered. Jaden continued, "Because I used to think it was a logo, a set of buildings, a boardroom full of grown-ups in suits." He paused. "But it's not. A company is a mirror. It shows us who we really are, what we value, who we protect, and who we leave behind." The auditorium fell silent. "I don't want Carter Tech to be the mirror of what we've been. I want it to be a mirror of what we could be." Then, slowly, clearly, he laid it out. A plan to restructure the leadership model. A permanent employee council made up of people from every level of the company, including janitors, receptionists, and interns that would hold equal power in decision-making for internal policies. A new transparency initiative where all employee complaints would be handled by an independent ethics committee, not buried under layers of bureaucracy. A profit-sharing system that included every employee, not just executives, where success wasn't hoarded, but shared. He finished with a final note. Leadership isn't about who has the most power. It's about who carries the most responsibility. And I want to carry it with all of you not above you. No one clapped. At first. Then one person stood. It was Rosa. Then Angela. Then the cafeteria manager. Then the head of facilities. The room rose, slowly, like dawn breaking over concrete. And Langston? He didn't clap. He didn't speak. He just watched, eyes tight, lips thin. And then, without a word, he walked out of the room. By the end of the week, Jaden's plan went to a vote. It passed. Not unanimously, but overwhelmingly. For the first time in its history, Carter Tech became a company where leadership didn't sit at the top of a pyramid but at the center of a circle. Langston tendered his resignation 2 days later. "Not my kind of structure," he said coldly. "Good luck running this place like a summer camp." Jaden didn't argue, because he knew it wasn't luck that would make this work. It was belief. Months passed, then a year. Jaden grew not just taller, but deeper, wiser. He still wore his hoodie to meetings, still took the bus sometimes, still had lunch in the cafeteria with Angela or the new crop of interns. But he also read corporate law books in his spare time, took online finance courses, shadowed department leads. And when Forbes ran a cover story with his face under the headline, "The CEO who changed capitalism before he could drive," he laughed, but only once. Because he didn't care about headlines. He cared about legacy, and not the kind engraved on plaques, the kind that lived in people's stories. One summer morning, he returned to the park where it all began, sat on the same bench he used to share with his grandfather. The breeze rustled the trees overhead. Children screamed with joy in the distance. An elderly couple fed pigeons nearby. Jaden took a breath and opened his notebook, still the same old one, worn and soft at the edges. He turned to a fresh page. At the top, he wrote, "What would you change if you could?" Then he paused, pen hovering. And beneath it, in smaller letters, he added, "What are you waiting for?" He closed the notebook and sat in silence. Because he knew the world didn't change all at once. It changed one voice at a time, one risk, one brave small act. And it began with the boy they asked to leave the room, who chose to walk back in anyway. Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.